Hello again. As a great and long-time fan of vampire films, I was intrigued to see a woman of Igbo heritage playing the part of Count Dracula in a new stage production in London. Well, not just Dracula, she plays all the characters in Bram Stoker's famous book. One of the weirdest things about the reviews for the production is that seemingly not one theatre critic actually noticed that she was black. This is distinctly odd. Either these folk are genuinely so with it and right on that they really don't notice that a bald black woman was trying to pass herself off as Professor Van Helsing and Dracula, or they felt that it would be indelicate to draw attention to it. The closest that anybody comes to mentioning this feature of the production is when the BBC refers on their website to her Dracula delivered in a Nigerian accent and crowned with bright red hair. I give a link to this review in the description to this video. Everybody else seems willing to suspend disbelief and either ignore or perhaps do not notice the glaring anomaly. Of course, Erivo is not the first black vampire to appear on stage or screen. I have, as I say, long been a fan of vampire films, and I remember with pleasure when the film Blacula, made in 1972, came out. It was part of the so-called blaxploitation craze at that time in American cinema. I dare say that older viewers will recollect the Shaft movies made at about the same time, starring Richard Roundtree. Some years later, black Jamaican singer Grace Jones starred in the 1986 film Vamp as a serious and important vampire. These films were different from Cynthia Erivo's playing Count Dracula in that the blackness of the vampires was explained. In Blacula, it was an integral part of the plot because the black vampire had been an African prince who had approached Dracula's aid in putting an end to the slave trade. He was, alas, bitten by the Count and given the nickname Blacula. The new stage production of Dracula attempts no such explanation, and we are simply invited to ignore, or not to notice or remark upon, the fact that a dozen white European characters are all played by an Igbo woman. I find this slightly odd. For one thing, there is of course the question of cultural appropriation. Dracula is about a specifically and explicitly European version of the vampire myth, that associated with modern-day Romania. It's odd to see a nobleman from that part of the world portrayed by a black woman, speaking with a pronounced Nigerian accent. All the odder, incidentally, because Erivo was actually born in London. One can only assume that she adopts that Igbo accent for dramatic purposes. The curious thing about all this is that there are actually vampire myths which have their origin in West Africa. That is to say, genuine black vampire legends from the same part of the world from which Cynthia Erivo's family come. Some of these are associated with the Ashanti and Akan peoples in what is now Ghana, but others come from the Igbo themselves. I suppose that what puzzles me is that if somebody of Igbo ancestry wishes to play the part of a vampire who speaks with an Igbo accent, why on earth does she not use figures drawn from the folklore of that part of the world? For one thing, this would remove the obvious contradiction between the black person posing as a European count and would explain at once the Igbo accent and skin colour. This is, as I say, how the matter was handled in the film Blacula. I don't understand why an English novel drawing wholly upon European legends should have been chosen as a vehicle and showcase for Cynthia Erivo's talents. There is a rich body of West African stories about vampires upon which to draw. There would have been another advantage in doing so, and that is that we are most of us thoroughly familiar with the story of Dracula as related by Bram Stoker. But I'm pretty sure that few people know about the Ashanti and Igbo legends about the phenomenon of vampirism. It would have made for a startling new perspective on vampires and been a truly original piece of work. Why is it that it's from European culture that this kind of thing is always drawn? I cannot resist relating my favourite Bram Stoker anecdote at this point. Some years ago, I wrote a guidebook to Chelsea and Kensington. Well, it was called Not a Guide to Kensington, Chelsea. And I found that Stoker once lived in a house in Chain Hall. He was walking home one evening along the embankment of that part of the River Thames, and he saw a man drowning. He dived into the Thames, rescued him, and then helped the half-dead man back to his house and laid him on the kitchen table before racing off in search of a doctor. The man died after Stoker left the house. Enter Mrs. Stoker, who knew nothing of what had happened, and came home to find a corpse on the kitchen table. It caused something of a row. Stoker's wife had previously been engaged to Oscar Wilde, by the way, but discovered in time that he was batting for the other team, as they say.